Welcome, folks, to our second session for day 2 of Conclave 2024. And our talk up to bat now is the Gnostic Restoration in Modern France by the Reverend Dr. Siobhan Houston. The Reverend Dr. Siobhan Houston was ordained as an independent Catholic priest in 2003 by Bishop Martha Schultz. She is a graduate of Harvard Divinity School and studied Western esotericism at the doctoral level with Dr. Nicholas Goodrick Clark. She is the author of Priests, Gnostics, and Magicians, European Roots of Esoteric Independent Catholicism, as well as 2 other books. And she has written for numerous periodicals, including Theosophical History, Gnosis Magazine, and Parabola. And on that note, I should also note, talking about Gnosis Magazine, we had the very friendly and hilarious and learned Richard Smalley as a guest about 10 years ago in Chicago, where he did a talk on inner Christianity. So with that, Dr. Houston, I turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you so much for inviting me. I am very excited to talk with you all. I watched some of the lectures yesterday as I was able, and I just wanted to mention a couple things that before we begin the talk on the French Gnostics is a little bit about the book itself. So the book came out in 2008, and it was my final project for the doctorate through Graduate Theological Foundation. And I have not revisited it. I've read it a couple times in the last 16 years, but I will tell you that and I think it is a really good history of the independent Catholic movement and the beginnings of it in Europe. And that didn't really exist in updated form of that. Peter Anson had a book that explored some of that territory, but it was outdated. So hopefully somebody will come along soon and do another history that that brings in some of the more contemporary churches, priests, Gnostics, and so forth. So I also have listened to some of the talks by Dr. William Bien on the Gnostic Church in France. And they're excellent. If you haven't listened to them, I recommend them. They're from the 2011 conclave, and it's 2 parts, audio only. So I actually listened to both of them and got a lot out of them. And he has information I didn't have because he's talking to different sources. And one point he makes is that everything's a little bit murky in this history. You know, people claim to have this apostolic succession, or they were a primate of that church, and so forth. And some of it can be verified, some of it can't. Some of it can't. So it's good to get some different viewpoints on the history of the French Gnostic Church. So I'm going to just set the stage a little bit by talking about what was going on in the late 18th century, and namely that's the French Revolution, which really changed things a lot in France. So the French Revolution was very hostile to the church. And at that time, the Roman Catholic Church owned 10% of the land. They were the first class as far as the society, which was divided into 3 different classes. The church and the church priests, employees, so forth, they were considered the first class. And they had a lot of privileges other people didn't have. The second class is called the nobility, which is pretty self-explanatory. And the third class were the peasants, which was 85% at least of the population. And after the French Revolution, the church had to change the way they operated in France. Their lands were taken away from them, and there was a lot that went on that really kind of demoted their position, even though they were still the state church. But there's a growing kind of anti-Catholic sense in France, even though most people are still Catholic. And it's in this sort of environment that in the early 1800s, a couple of churches spring up. And one is the Holy Church of Christ, which traces its roots back to the Knights Templar in 1804 by a couple of different clerics and Frenchmen, including former Roman Catholic priest Bernard Fabre-Palaprat. His name will come up over and over and over again through the French Gnostic Church history. And one thing that was interesting about this church is that it required Masonic membership. So already you see the esoteric church becoming the, I don't know if you could say, exoteric vehicle in a sense for Masonry. They were just intertwined, and this remains so pretty much throughout the history of the French Gnostic Church in varying degrees. And so they posited the two branches of the church, which we're all familiar with: the inner church of St. John, the exoteric church of St. Paul. So in Gnostic terms, you would say the first and second, in Valentinian Gnostic terms, as far as the pneumatics and the psychics, you would say that the pneumatics and psychics were members, could be members. And I'm not sure who exactly determined that. I guess the bishops. The Hylics would not be part of this kind of a church because they would belong to the outer church of St. Peter, for just the masses who didn't really understand or want further knowledge about the esoteric traditions. And then Ferdinand Châtel, whose dates are 1795 to 1857, he became the head cleric. And he carried on the Fabre-Palaprat line while de-emphasizing the occult nature of the church and the Masonic nature. So his focus was, he really wanted a Gallican church, which means a French nationalistic church. And so that's kind of the way he went. And this was in opposition to the Roman Catholic Church. So his church was called l'Église catholique française. And this happened in 1833. He started launching small communities in France and in Belgium. But in the early 1840s, we have the church authorities really coming after him, as well as the civil authorities, to repress his sect. And after 1870, we don't really hear much about Bishop Châtel's church. Then the next church that comes up in the early 1800s is Pierre Eugène Michel Vintrau, who founded the church. His dates are 1807 to 1875, and he was a French layman. And he founded another esoterically oriented church in 1839. And the interesting thing about this church, one of the interesting things, is that he had a prophetic vision, which echoes in Jules Doinel's prophetic vision about the establishment of the Gnostic restoration. We'll hear about that later. So he was a layman, and Jesus told him to start a church. And it became very, very popular. So part of the idea behind the church, according to Vintrau, it was that the reign of the suffering Christ, and we have a little dog over here trying to get out of the gate. Suffering Christ was over. That's over. And the new age is coming. The age of the Paraclete, or the Holy Spirit, the Comforter. And it's actually the Holy Spirit of love is coming. And the church expanded greatly. He did a lot of proselytizing, vigorous traveling and preaching, with several Roman Catholic priests joining him. And he became so popular that he attracted the attention of the civil and church authorities. And he was arrested around 1843, thrown into jail for theft. And whether or not that was, something he actually was guilty of, we don't know. But he spends a few years in prison, 5 years actually. And in 1848, he has another vision of Jesus. And he was given a consecration by Jesus and a vernacular liturgy. So instead of Latin, it's going to be French. So this is a big breakthrough too, obviously, because then you can have more participation from the lay people. And Ventrus died in 1875, and then he's succeeded by a former Roman Catholic priest named Joseph Antoine Bolin, 1824 to 1893, also known as the Abbé de Bolin. And Bolin was very interested in esoteric, religious, sexual practices. And his church grew and grew, surprisingly enough. And it eventually became more of an occult and spiritualistic movement. And I am not really sure, well, we'll hear about that church as well later, a little bit. So we're setting the stage for the fin de siècle, the turn of the century in Paris. And before I do that, does anyone have any questions? No questions?
I don't have a question. I just want to make note. I really enjoyed that you tied the scripture of the types, the pneumatics and the psychics, to the foundations. It was just it was a noteworthy touch. So,
okay, thank you. Well, we're going to do more of that when we come to Jules Doinel, because it becomes even more explicit. Thank you, Tyler. Just grab some water here. It's so dry in Denver. All right. So in 1890, France and other parts of Western Europe become aflame with this interest in esotericism, occultism, spiritualism, anything and everything that has to do with art and music. That is more in the new wave sort of movement. It becomes very vital and liberated for artists and writers, poets, playwrights, and the politically defiant. So there are bombings going on in Paris at this time, but it really gives people who live there an opportunity for creation and for expression that really could hardly be rivaled in Europe at that time. And into that atmosphere, the Roman Catholic Church decides, I think they're starting to get a little concerned with the situation, because remember, they've already had their power deracinated, after the revolution. And now they're seeing people interested in fields that the church does not endorse. And this impacts them. They're quite concerned. So Leo XIII promulgates an encyclical in 1884 called Humanum Genum, which censored Freemasonry as a perverse and evil society, and that it wielded a pernicious influence in France. So after that publication of that encyclical, if you were Roman Catholic and you joined a Mason lodge, you could be excommunicated. That didn't really stop too many Roman Catholics from joining lodges. So Masonry was quite popular at that time. And one man who was a Mason and interested in esotericism was named Jules Doinel. His dates are 1842 to 1903. And he is the philosopher and occultist who launches the modern Gnostic movement in France. I just want to mention, please raise your hand at any time when I'm talking. I'm more than happy to stop and answer any questions that may arise. So in 1888, he's working as an archivist in the city of Orléans, and he found a Cathar document, supposedly from the 10th century, that was written by a Cathar bishop at the time. And he became fascinated by the Cathars and the Bogomils. The Bogomils, I'm sure most of you are familiar with them. They are a dualistic sect that was in the Balkans from about the 10th century to the 15th century. And there is some communication between the Cathars, who are in the south of France, a little like the 12th to 14th centuries, and the Bogomils, who predated the Cathars and who share a lot of philosophy and practices with the Cathars. Actually, the Cathars probably got a number of those from the Bogomils. We know that the Cathars had some of the Bogomil manuscripts that have been found in their libraries. And I just wanted to say something about the Bogomils. We're seeing more and more research being done on the Bogomils by Bulgarian, Macedonian scholars. And it seems, I mean, they're different from the Cathars, definitely. They're more moderate. Just like the Cathars in Italy were more moderate than the French Cathars. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But there is a lineage that claims that their origins lie in the Bogomil tradition. So I'm gonna, yeah, okay, hi, Tom. Were the Bogomils persecuted to extinction? You know, they seem to be very integrated into their communities. And they seem to be, like I said, more moderate than the Cathars of France. And one lineage that is popular now, we're talking about popular in the esoteric world, which means, you know what, they have a couple hundred people. I don't know. But no, they have more than that. But is the lineage coming from Peter Doinel and Omram Mikhail Ivanhoff? Is anyone familiar with those personages besides your Grace?
I was going to say I am familiar, but I guess that's kind of a given. One of my overlapping interests is I'm a graduate member of the Order of Bards, Ovates, and Druids.
Right.
And the guy who was chosen chief for the last 30 years used to be when he had stepped away kind of from pagan stuff for a bit, Philip Carr-Gomm, he was a student of Omran Michael Ivanhoff. So that's
wow.
I was aware tangentially, but I didn't dig into the history of the guy's ideas until I realized there was that connection there. But he basically described him as a guru. He never used the word cult to describe him, but he basically said he described Omran Michael as being more of a guru, charismatic type.
Yeah, let me speak to that. I'm just going to let the dog out of her hands. She's not happy. Hi, honey. Oh, there you go, baby. Okay. All right. Yeah, so, you know, this lineage coming from Peter Doinel is out of Bulgaria, and it's very focused on becoming pure. And that's another thing, of course, that weighs on the conscience of Gnostics. All Gnostics is, at least in the Middle Ages, becoming pure. And that often means less and less interaction with the material world, as it were. Being vegetarian, rising early. In Peter Junoff lineage, they rise early and watch the sun come up, and there are subtle and more gross rays that come from the sun that help one in one's spiritual life, that awaken certain energies and help one become illuminated. And the path becomes easier the less interaction you have with the demiurge's world, in a sense. And a big part of their tradition is music. And that's another way to raise one's consciousness. It's very pure. They're not listening to anything to do with popular music. They compose their own music. And Peter Junoff was a violinist and composed some very, very beautiful music. And even today, members of these groups write just gorgeous music, and also music for chorales, which that's something that the Bulgarians are known for. These like unearthly choruses that sing these songs that, well, I don't know the words, they're definitely uplifting, and they're all over YouTube. And material about Peter Junoff, which is spelled D as in dog, E-U-N as in Nancy, O-V as in Victor. And we can put up Mikhail Ivanhoff's. So Mikhail Ivanhoff was a student of Peter Junoff in Bulgaria. And the Orthodox Church authorities came down on Peter Junoff and subjected him to house arrest in the capital city of Sofia. So he wasn't able to preach anymore, to teach his students and to lead these musical and dance extravaganzas he would do in the mountains. Again, the mountains are very important to this tradition because the mountains are close to God. They're more pure. The air is more rarefied there. And so Peter Junoff is hamstrung in Bulgaria, and probably many of his followers are as well. So he sends Mikhail Ivanhoff, who was 37 at the time, and he was a school teacher and high school principal. He sends him to France to preach. And Mikhail doesn't know any French, so he learns it on the spot. He arrives in 1937, and he lives in France and teaches and collects disciples, although there was not any kind of formal vows or any sort of situation like that, but he was the teacher. And he teaches a Gnostic, he's definitely in the Gnostic tradition. And I would say the Bogomils are somewhat like the Cathars, kind of irreverent towards all the trappings of the churches, like the crosses and the censer and the respect you must pay to priests and all the holidays and the saints. They just think that's really nonsense. And it seems like the Cathars thought that as well. They had just had no time for the church, which was really the exoteric symbol of the demiurge, right? Do we need to talk about the demiurge, or are people pretty much familiar with the Gnostic philosophy about, the true God? Okay. Oh yeah, okay, good, all right. I mean, there are, in Catholicism, there are two kinds of, there's the extreme Gnostics, I guess you would say, who believe that from the very beginning, Satan opposed the true God. And there's another branch, more the Italian Cathars and perhaps the Bogomils, who don't draw such a black and white origin, don't have such a black and white origin story, but the ruler of this world, Satan or Shaitan in Hebrew, falls from the realm of the true God, and the world is created, and the fallen angel rules it. So not everyone believes that Satan and God were enemies from the very beginning. So Mikhail Ivanhoff goes to France and he's teaching there. He teaches there until his death in 1987. And he did not leave a successor. He was, definitely seen as kind of the guru. You see pictures of him, he looks almost identical to his teacher, long white hair, long white beard, very effulgent. And he taught alchemy, he taught Kabbalah, he taught all the usual esoteric avenues to enlightenment. And there are some outposts in the world. I wrote in Gnosis about my trip to one that was in Quebec, where no one spoke English. Not one person spoke English except me. So it was quite an interesting retreat I had there. So it's mainly, his tradition is mainly known in Bulgaria and some of the Balkan countries and in French-speaking countries. A lot of people in the States very involved in esoterica don't know about Mikhail Ivanhoff, but I am still his student after 35 years, and I find him really very supportive on the inner planes and find his wisdom really applicable to my walk in spirit. Although he does come across, and because he's from another generation, he comes across as a little bit dated. So, but he was dated because, he was born in 1900. So you have to cut him a little slack for that, I think. Does anyone have any questions?
No, I was just going to say thank you for the interesting perspective and the personal perspective on that, because the only thing I had known prior to anything about Ivanhoff was listening to some of Philip's talks where he references his own spiritual history, and he had spent, 7, 8, or 9 years as a student. He had also been working with some esoteric groups out of Bulgaria in terms of kind of having like esoteric salon type events and book clubs, particularly when religion was a lot more repressed, right? And he had only talked about it in the context of kind of contrasting it with his Druidic teacher Ross Nichols, that that Ivanhoff was a man of charisma, whereas Nichols was a little bit more of a bookish type culture person, and so he kind of contrasted them as teachers. So my knowledge of Ivanhoff is limited to the secondhand by listening to those talks. So that's an interesting perspective. So I really appreciate that you shared it. Because other than that, I've never encountered anybody in the West who has been you're the second person I've encountered that has been a student of Ivanhoff.
Well, I'm glad to hear that it brought some new knowledge into people's consciousness. I will say, I'll just, as an aside, when I heard about Ivanhoff, and I really do feel this was directed from the inner planes, I was working as a book review editor for a Hindu publication in San Francisco. And I've been following this Hindu path for quite a few years. But I was feeling like, hey, here I am, this Irish, Scottish, Jewish girl who's dressing in saris all the time, but I'm a Westerner. And Jung said, you really should be studying a path that comes out of your own tradition, in most cases, in your own, life tradition, your ancestral tradition. And I was feeling very uncomfortable about still being a Hindu. And in the mail comes a book by Mikhail Ivanhoff for me to review, and it's called The Powers of Thought. And once I read that in when was that? Oh, that was, 1987, I believe. He died in 88. Once I read that, I left Hinduism and got back into the Western esoteric tradition. unfortunately, when I was a teenager and needed like a monastery or something like that, the Western esoteric tradition had nothing to offer me. So for a variety of reasons, I needed to be in a kind of a residential setting to do my work. And my parents had kicked me out because I just wasn't with the program. I wasn't planning to go to law school. And so, I kind of took shelter in the Hindu tradition where there were quite a few ashrams available to live in and so forth. But I've never gone back to an Eastern path since then. Okay. So after these, so we talked a little bit about, the Cathars and the Bogomils. So the Bogomils were active from 10th to 15th century in Bulgaria and Macedonia and that area. And like I said, Peter Janov and Michael Ivanhoff see themselves as carriers of that tradition that really never died. And we're going to turn now to Jules Doinel and his interest in the Cathars. So he's obviously in France. He's working in an area that is not far from where the Cathars had their strongholds. And he's already involved in so many different groups, the Masons, and he's conversant with the Theosophists who were very active at that time and just involved and knew a lot of people in kind of the esoteric movement of the time. So he has a vision in 1988, the same year he was doing the archival work in Orleans and found this Cathar document. He has a vision of the Eon Jesus. And the Eon Jesus consecrates him as the Bishop of Montsegur and Primate of the Albigenses. Montsegur is the castle, which is extant in France, that was the last stand of the Cathars. That's when they had their final defeat. And you can go there. Apparently I'm not allowed to go there because I have tried 3 times and I even made hotel reservations, and I was in Carcassonne, which is also part of the Cathar country. And I think it's the inner world stopping me. I mean, it's just crazy. I'm not allowed to go to Montsegur, but it's open. It's it's a tourist destination in a sense. A lot of people are still fascinated by the Cathars, and there's a lot of tourist industry in the south of France that, well, I don't know if exploit is the right word, but draw upon the Cathar tradition and tours and so forth. Has anyone else been to that part of France, south of France? Okay, yeah. It's very beautiful. And Montsegur has a very, very bloody history. The church would burn the Cathars on the pyre when they found them, and they finally put them down for good. I actually do not have a date for the Montsegur massacre, the final massacre. I will have to try to get that. So Doinel is consecrated by the inner Jesus. And then he starts having seances with Lady Caithness, Maria Caithness, who was this French-British noblewoman who had married a British nobleman, and he had died. So she had quite a bit of wealth. She was also in charge of the Theosophical Society in France. She had her fingers pretty much in everything. She thought she was the incarnation of Mary Stuart. This is a time when theosophy is extremely popular and people have a lot of really interesting ideas about themselves. Oh, thank you very much, Scott. Could you just flash that again? I just saw the, can you bring it up again? Oh, well. You probably all saw it. I guess I could, oh, here's the chat. I just would like.
March 16th, 1244.
Okay, 1244. Okay. Thomas, I'll answer your question about the Gnostic healing book after, okay? So he goes through these series of seances with Lady Catholicis, and the way she gets messages is by holding a pendulum over a Ouija board. And in one of these seances, Eon Jesus commands Jules Doinel to establish my Gnostic church. The demiurge will be powerless against it. Receive the Paraclete. So you have again the kind of the message of the Paraclete, like this is the new age of spirituality, of coming back or going back to the origins of the medieval Gnostic traditions and bringing them forward. And so this is parallel to what Vintras, who founded the the work of Mercy Church, that's what it was called, where he is initiated by an inner contact. And that is not that unusual. So where he's not looking back to the apostolic succession, which has become such a concern in more recent times, but he's directly anointed by Jesus himself. And, we can say, did this really happen? Did he imagine it? It doesn't even really matter in a sense to me, but it's a spiritual anointing. And there was one thing that Dr. William Behan, what is his religious name?
Mar Thomas.
Mar Thomas. Okay, thank you. In these talks that he gave, he talks about, well, what was restored? We talk about the Gnostic restoration. What was restored? Does anyone have any ideas about, if you know a little bit about the subject already, what is being restored? Anybody?
Well, I'll jump in.
Okay.
I reliably run my mouth whenever the opportunity is given. I never use 5 words when 20 will do. I mean, thinking back to Will's talk about it, I mean, he argued, I think that, as he saw it, I think the main thrust of Doinel's restoration was primarily to not only restore Gnosticism, of course, and there was that kind of neo-Cathar slant, but he viewed it as primarily being a thing of the divine feminine, if I recall.
Mm-hmm.
And my experience of it, I mean, I've got a few of the kind of older, more detailed histories, like René Leforster's book on 19th century occultism in France. So everything I've seen kind of points to, I think Will kind of hit the nail on the head. I think Doinel was really pushing the divine feminine, which of course was pretty radical for his time.
Yes. And in the Doinel Church, as in the original French Catholic Church, we have bishops of both sexes. And we have the male bishops or archbishops, and we have the Sophias, and that is what the female bishops are called. And we know that 2 female bishops were ordained in the original in the restored Catholic Church. One was named Sophia, called Sophia Marie, and her name is, I try to say it right, Marie Chavel de Chauvigny. The interesting thing about the restoration of the feminine, and to me, in Jules Doinel's church, is you never hear anything about the Sophias. Have you heard? You know, we know one name. That's this woman, Marie Chavel de Chauvigny. You know, never hear anything about them in the histories.
And I think the only reason we know anything about her is because most they're detractors of modern Gnosticism, if I recall right. I'm kind of working on the fly. I think she also used, I can't remember if it was her that used the esoteric name of Sophia Esclarmonde, but she had published.
Yes, and that was one of the original Catholic.
Yeah, she had published some material that, I don't know, I think at the time, I can't remember what the exact statements are, you know, that made some controversial statements that detractors basically used to kind of pin evil on Gnosticism, much in the same way that kind of modern conspiracy theorists use Albert Pike in Freemasonry as kind of the source of conspiracies and kind of words that he may or may not have actually written or said. That's the sense that I get. So I think perhaps the only reason, you know, that her stuff as a Sophia came to attention is because she had detractors. And if she didn't have detractors, I'm not sure we would have known much about her at all. But I do think there's a document or two kicking around from her time that she had written, but it's been ages since I've looked at it. But you're right, there's not that much attention given to the Sophias, which is unfortunate because Doinel gave them plenty of attention in his own time, as far as I remember, right?
Right. And in the original Cathars, they would have, say, a jurisdiction, and they would have two bishops. There would be the male bishop and the female bishop. And when they would send out the perfects, the people that had, well, I don't know if we're going to have time to go into the different rituals and so forth, but those who are vowed basically as religious, who had taken the vows of the consolamentum and the apparuiamentum, which is another ceremony that the Cathars had, as well as they had as form of the Eucharist. They would go out, the perfects, the vowed religious would go out 2 by 2, and often it was a male and female group, that you know, pair that would go out and preach. And so the early Cathars were very, very egalitarian. So there's that lineage, or that desire in the Doinel church to have women be in egalitarian, you know, in similar positions as men. But I'm not sure how much that really happened, because we're looking at groups that really had most, if not all, the members were Masons. And at that time, as far as I know, Mason lodges were not co-ed, right? It was only men who could become Masons. So I think that really probably edged out a lot of women who might have been interested. But even now, like in contemporary Gnostic churches, we know that it's primarily men, like 75–80% are men. And I was going to talk a little bit about, I don't know, I won't have time really to address this, but it's something to think about. So I know several esotericists that are women, one that runs her own mystery school and so forth. And I have my own experiences, because I started on the esoteric path when I was 14, 15. Women are treated differently in magical orders. They usually have male heads, and they are treated as lesser. And I don't think this has been written about much. And it's kind of that would be an interesting book to look at women in magical orders. And because I have been in several magical orders with very, very well-known Gnostic archbishops from different traditions. And I was treated fairly abysmally. And, you know, I'm fairly educated and experienced and so forth. So and it was all about power over, like, I will just say one Gnostic bishop who wanted me to kind of be the Sophia, I guess, of his church, he told me, he had no formal academic training, told me that I had to abide by his philosophy and only preach his philosophy. I wasn't allowed to have any kind of independent thoughts. And I just said, well, I'm out of here. I'm out of here, because above all, I need intellectual freedom. I can't just parrot what you're saying. But so that was the bar, that you do not disagree or do not even have any kind of alternative philosophy or ideas about Gnosticism and practice theory that does not come from the head of the order. And that's not uncommon. So enough said.
I can proudly note that the women of the AJC regularly get in my face.
Good. Yeah, I know. I'm not speaking to the AJC. I'm just
I know.
my.
But I encourage it. We have great discussions and debates, and they let me have it where called for. But in terms of kind of overcoming that thing, even when you have a welcoming and inclusive environment, you still have to deal with the kind of inertia or perhaps momentum of 2,000 years of history that has put its boot on the neck of women in spirituality. The AJC has been around for about 25 years, and it took us 20 years to get a woman into the priesthood. We had ordained women to the diaconate, but nobody had gone all the way for a whole variety of reasons. I'd like to think that we were pretty inclusive and welcoming, but there's more than just my own ignorance and difficulty and stubbornness to overcome. There's the whole of history.
Exactly, and the whole of cultural conditioning.
Yeah, and Angie, our first ordained woman priest, is in the call. She was ordained last year on the Magdalene's Day. And she works with our parish out here, and we're very happy for it. And she also came out of a difficult prior religious environment. One day you guys should have coffee.
Definitely. I would love that.
That would be great. I'll just speak to that a little bit. I often, when I'm working with other women in seminary, I kind of encourage them to dig into their spite, like let that fuel you into your ministry, because there is this inertia and this heaviness that weighs on all of us that are called to serve in major orders as women, and it's something that we have to overcome in ourselves and in our environment. And so spite can be very useful.
Well said. Thank you. So we're not really getting too far into this. I think what I have is just, Angie? Okay. I thought Angie was going to say something.
I'm good.
Oh, you're good. Okay, great. And well, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the Gnostic Church. We're not going to be able to get into the iterations and the recombinations and all the history, which is in my book. And also I thought there was a good article. I'll send Jonathan the links. The History of the Gnostic Catholic Church. It's on the Invisible Basilica of Sabazius, which is an OTO site, and it's by Tau Apirian, who I have no idea who that is, but I felt like he had. Yes.
David Scriven is his.
David Scriven.
Yeah, he's the U.S. Grand Master for the OTO. So
great, thank you. Yeah, I thought his précis was very, very good, and I learned a lot. It goes on, of course, into the OTO history, which I was not terribly interested in, but there is quite a bit about the Gnostic French lineage and the different personalities that were involved. So Doinel has the church for about, he established it in 1890. By 1895, something happens that is maybe not that surprising, but it was quite a shock to the church. Doinel leaves the church. He goes back to his native Roman Catholicism. And not only does he leave it, he joins with a French journalist named Leo Taxil. That's his pen name. And they write books and other kinds of articles, pamphlets, and so forth about the evils of Masons and how the Gnostic Church is inspired by the devil. So he becomes really an enemy of the church that he promulgated for 5 years. And nobody knows for sure why, of course, but there was a great quote from one of the French Gnostic bishops in Doinel's church. I'm not sure who it was, but he said that he said something like, okay, well, we don't know why, Valentin the second has done this. It was probably a choice between madness and death, and we are glad he took the path of madness. So, and he may not have been the most stable person. I don't know a lot about him, about his personal life. We really don't have much information about that, but he was dabbling in all sorts of different traditions. So he does turn against the Gnostics. And in 1890, so after he leaves, so after he leaves, Fabre de Essarts, who's known as Tausinasius, he assumes the patriarchate. And he gets assistance from another French bishop, a French Gnostic bishop, Tausophronius. And they kind of changed the church from a Catholic church to a church of Christian Gnosis. It's subtle, but it kind of moves more and more towards a church that is hand in hand with the Martinist order. And they found a new church called l'Église chrétienne moderne Gnostique. So that supplanted Doinel's l'Église Gnostique de France. So when Doinel recanted in 1891-92 and wanted to come back into the church, Fabre de Essarts consecrated him as Tau Jules in this newly fashioned church, the church of the modern Christian Neo-Gnostic. So I think that's where I'm going to stop. There's more, there's other churches that form, and there's schisms, surprisingly enough. And it's a fascinating history. So I encourage you, if you're interested in this, to further explore it. I've only really scratched the surface a bit. So I'm just looking at some questions here about were the Bougainville's persecuted to extinction. I think we talked about that. I addressed that a little bit. They were probably, the Orthodox Church is no different than the Roman Catholic Church in the West as far as putting down heretics. So even in modern times. So
since we have time, I just read a little bit of I read Elaine Pagel's book on the origin of Satan. And earlier in your talk, and this wasn't the point of your talk, so hopefully this question is, fitting in here, but you kind of mentioned how there was a difference of opinion on Satan. And my understanding was the book of Job was the oldest book in the Bible, and then like the progression of Satan's evolution from prosecutor in the court of the cosmos to Antichrist begins there. Do you have, am I spurring any thoughts? Can you talk to that at all? and maybe relate it to the different understanding within the Bogomils and the Cathars, and at all of the difference of opinion on Satan's role?
Sure. Well, I can address parts of that. I have not read her book. I've read almost everything else she's written, but I have not read The Origin of Satan. And so I will say, so I am Jewish by birth, surprisingly enough. Yes, I do have an Irish name. But my father is Scottish, Irish, Canadian, American. And my mother was Jewish. And they met at the Jewish Student Union when they were undergrads. So I was raised Jewish. And so maybe I didn't pick up that book because I didn't really have a lot of questions about the topic. So I can say in Judaism, Shaitan is the Hebrew name for Satan. Shaitan is seen as a servant of God, not independent of God. And so he is used by the Holy One to test, devotees or people on the religious path. It's kind of, it's similar to the place of Maya Devi, or illusion, the goddess of illusion in Hinduism and Buddhism. She's not independent of all that is. She works to help test and purify humans. So that's my understanding from the Jewish point of view. Does anyone else have any thoughts about that they'd like to add?
Just going to note, there's a comment from Reverend Jonathan. It says,
okay.
Scholar of Judaism, Agata Lulek Robson, sorry if I'm mangling the name, if they ever watch our talks about Job as a kind of proto-Gnostic book that leads to a later Jewish stream of Gnosticism.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't get all these other messages. Quoting Jerry Garcia. All right.
I have a question, slightly
Sure.
with the talk, but also a little bit tangential, because I wouldn't be me if I didn't go in a wild direction. Because we've talked about esoteric Catholicism, neo-Gnosticism, Doinel and the like. We've also, and we've also talked about the challenge of women in ministry. So, being a priest yourself with obviously a very long and deep history and a variety of traditions, and you've chosen to kind of undertake your ministry and work in a kind of independent and in esoteric vein, knowing full well, obviously, as you do, because you wrote the book on it, on Doinel and esoteric Catholicism and stuff. What kind of, and maybe this with overlaps with your vocation, I guess, as a woman in holy orders, what was the thing that kind of compelled you to not only take up that vocation, but to take up that vocation in this exact kind of context that we're talking about?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Thank you. I would just say, even though I'm Jewish, I hung out at the Catholic Church a lot, starting very young. And I think that this is, as an aside, this would be a really interesting book. Oriel Fox, what is his name? Foxwood, who's in Orion Foxwood. What is his name?
Orion Foxwood.
Orion Foxwood. Yeah, he talks a little bit about the concept being born to magic. And I think a lot of us, probably most of us, can relate to that you come in and this is your path and you don't know anyone else on it and you're just on it and exploring. And so I would say I was on it from a young age of about 11. And I was going to, my parents were very secular Marxists. They let me go to the Catholic Church for services. We never went to a synagogue, even though the household was Jewish, basically. But I got really interested in the Catholic Church, and I do think it's a past life. manifestation for various reasons, which I won't go into, but and I was also came to it through someone who was mentioned, I believe yesterday, by His Grace, William G. Gray, and the Sangreal Sodality. His first book, The Inner Tradition, The Inner Lights, I think. I forgot the name of his first book, but it is about kind of the sacramental Christian path as a way to organize and work the esoteric path. And many, many, many of the early teachers of Gnosticism did have orders in the different Gnostic and esoteric churches, including William G. Gray. And so that's how I came to it, not really through the Roman Catholic Church. But I will say that I was always fascinated by the independent Catholics, but it took me many years before I got ordained because I think I had to have a female bishop. And my bishop was Martha Schultz, was ordained and was consecrated in the Church of Antioch, which is a very different, it has really, they're looking back to the liberal Catholic Church and Theosophy and Charles Ledbetter and so forth for their rituals and sacramental rituals, their understanding of what's going on during a Mass. And if you have the courage and tenacity to read Signs of the Sacraments, you can read all about it. It's only about 700 pages.
Intestinal fortitude, perhaps?
Well, that was required for my ordination, so.
Okay. Well, I mean, for reading,
right.
Ledbetter in the Science of the Sacraments, you got to have a degree of intestinal fortitude.
Right. Yeah, he's terrible writer, I think. Well, he's an Edwardian from England, so I finally got ordained when I met a woman bishop, and she was in Colorado. And I think otherwise I just would not get ordained. And the way that I mean, looking back, I'm not sure I should have become a priest, at least not any kind of, I've never been interested in other people's problems. So it's just like, I'm not interested in pastoral care at all, but I do write and I study. And so in that way, I was serving the church that no longer exists. It was called the New Order of Glastonbury. And it was around for 35 years until the bishop's death in 2007. So that was sad. So I guess, my proclivity is for study and for writing. However, I really have not done anything. I've not done study or writing for the last 16 years. I wrote the book and then that was it. And I'm not sure that's going to be it forever, but that's it for, I have not put my toe back into academia. I'm now much more interested in working with my hands in the world of textile and fiber arts, which I've been doing since I was very young, and kind of gone back to that kind of and gotten out of my head in a way. Although I do have spiritual practices I use every day. So, and if there was a Gnostic church that I felt aligned with in my area, I might take advantage of that. But that's where it stands right now.
Well, thank you. I'm always interested in what makes people tick, particularly spiritually and vocationally, because it's the journey is always, I find, is unique of the individual, and people don't always conceptualize when they think, oh, I might like to do this, or I was thinking about doing this, but I don't know if I can. I think the more stories we hear from people about how they not only can, but they have, particularly from women, is going to be helpful to other folks who are considering a vocation, but have a hard time seeing if they fit in. So hearing about how other people have been able to do so, I think is good for candidates along the way. It's good for people to hear people that aren't me. And so and you've had you've brought a lot of really obviously rich and experienced journey to the not only the topic itself, but also just the conversation in general. That I think this is going to be this will I generally have a decent sense of which talks are going to be our more popular talks, and I think this will be among them.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that.
We have time for one more question, and then we got to give everybody a 10-minute break before the next talk. I mean, I like to squish them all together, but human beings need to do things like use the bathroom. There was
Scott had a question. Ritualist all the way.
I think that was Bishop Scott just asking about kind of your focus in priesthood, because you had mentioned that you were more interested in writing and study than in pastoral care. So I think he may have been inquiring as to whether or not you were big on ritual.
I like ritual by myself. I'm kind of picky, not picky, but I don't know how to say it. I feel really comfortable before I do ritual with people in a sense, and kind of on the same page. So I do ritual by myself and with some women friends who are not specifically Gnostic Catholics, but are members of other esoteric orders. So, and I would just say that as far as so I've been ostensibly working under Dr. Louis Kaiser. So because my bishop died, so I took shelter with him. But honestly, I have not had conversations with him. I don't even know if he's still really active with the home temple. I should find out. But I do have a bishop, and I very much respect him and respect his scholarly work. And I think there was a question just quickly about the Gnostic prayer that has been so popularized, the Aramaic prayer that I think Your Grace brought up yesterday about the origins of that prayer.
Yeah, the birther of the cosmos prayer,
Right.
which is very poetic, but I've always heard it's not necessarily accurate to the Aramaic.
It's not. It's not an Aramaic document. And when I bring this up, boy, I get slammed because the author of that book and the tradition is so held up as this, but he's not really a scholar of the tradition in as much as Louis Kaiser, who was an Episcopalian priest, got his PhD in New Testament studies and is fluent in Coptic and Aramaic and on and on and on, Greek, of course. And there was another, so Dr. Kaiser told me that is a translation of a 2nd century Syriac document. It is not directly from the Aramaic, even though Syriac is related to Aramaic. And I talked to another scholar who a New Testament scholar who echoed the same conclusion. It is not, we do not have the Aramaic prayer of the birther of the cosmos, Our Father in Aramaic. And it was, like I said, it's a 2nd century Syriac version that was translated from the Greek. So, I mean, it is a beautiful prayer, but it's not necessarily what it purports to be.
Yeah, I had brought it up because I'd compared it to the Rumi translations. So-called.
Oh, right, of Coleman Barks.
Coleman Barks, yeah. With that, though, we do have to wrap. There was a question that we didn't get to about the discoveries at Nag Hammadi. Maybe you can give a quick up or down, yes or no. Do you think the discoveries at Nag Hammadi and Qumran were magical?
were magical. As I don't know, what do you mean by magical? Like ritualistic magic, or it was I think it's magical that the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Nag Hammadi library were found in the same decade after thousands of years. I think that's magical. But as far as their value as magical documents, I can't really speak to that. I'm sorry. Paranormal. Are they paranormal? I don't know. I don't know if you're asking, were they placed there and or are there in a paranormal sense we discovered them, or their contents are paranormal? Well, maybe you can discuss that later.
I will close with just adding a thought. There was somebody, and perhaps it was, I don't know if it was Elaine Pagels or Marvin Meyer or one of the other folks that were involved in the original Nag Hammadi, but in their introduction to the Nag Hammadi library, they draw the contrast that that a whole spectrum of human history and Christian history is unearthed. This vision of diversity and spirituality is unearthed in the same year that they dropped the atomic bomb, and kind of contrasting kind of the horror with also the capability of humanity. And yeah, Tom follows up with was the discovery.
It was a discovered accident. That's a faith matter. Yeah, I couldn't. I don't think it's an accident. I'm really wish the discoverer hadn't burnt a bunch of the documents, given them to his mother and burnt them as firewood, whatever. But I don't think it was an accident. But that's my personal opinion.
Thank you for the lovely talk and the fantastic discussion. This was great. I really enjoyed this. I mean, it helps that I'm a nerd for this type of stuff, but also, interweaving it with the contextual history, your own story of vocation and experience of spirituality, I think really is a very, it's ice cream on top of cake with a cherry on top of that. I quite enjoyed that. So with that, we will take a 6-7 minutes break before we join Jason Memel for Gnosticism and art, which has kind of been an ongoing series with our conclaves, but I expect it's going to. And Dr. Siobhan, you're welcome, of course, to join us for the rest of conclave as you're able. Don't worry if there's stuff you can't make, you'll get a copy of the video. We're
all right. Thank you.
You took us up on the invitation. Thank you for doing that. That was great.
Of course. And thanks to Jonathan for facilitating all this.
He's okay. One day we might make him a priest. He's got some papers to finish, but
Yeah. I have to just say, my father was a Canadian American, and when he was 21, he had a British American citizenship. He was born in the province of, his parents were from the province of Canada, and he really made the wrong decision. He decided on American, and I've regretted that. I wish I could be with you all.
We would love to have you up here anytime.
Okay. Thank you.
So with that, we'll take a break for 5 or 6, and then we'll come back for Jason Memel.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.